I grew up in the system. It's not a story I enjoy telling, but I kind of feel like it's important right now. Whenever people ask me about it, I either change the subject or outright lie, but it's the truth. And it is one I would love to forget. My earliest memory isn't a good one, to be completely honest. I remember sitting in the back seat of the car, looking out of the window as my dad drove, and my mom sat beside him in front. Even though I'm not sure, I think I must have been 5 or 6 years old. The memory is surprisingly clear and vivid in my mind. If I close my eyes and concentrate, I can still remember the smell inside the car. Junk food, coffee, cigarettes, and a whiff of gasoline. I could feel my body shaking through the vibrations, the lights outside the windows whizzing by, and an old radio song I haven't heard in years. It was a trip my parents had planned for us. I still know that much. We were going someplace my mom had wanted to visit for years, and I remember how happy she seemed throughout the whole journey. I, on the other hand, was mostly bored during the drive. Back then, I got carsick easily, so I couldn't do much besides listening to the radio and, during the day, looking out of the window and imagining myself running next to the car, jumping over the other vehicles and obstacles like in a video game. But it was night then, and raining. So I watched the droplets of water hitting the outside of the window, forming small rivers that shrunk and swelled, came together and got torn apart while my dad drove us along the road. I think I remember us hitting a deep pothole, the whole car shaking and my mom laughing for a moment before suddenly the brakes squealed and my mother's giggle turned into a scream. Those next few moments are truly seared into my mind. Dad's hands were holding onto the steering wheel. Mom was grabbing the dashboard. Outside the windshield, I could see a guardrail coming toward us. The car's back wheels slid to the side. Dad screamed and we broke through the rail. All the lights I had seen before now disappeared behind us as the car continued shooting forward. Then suddenly, my body was lifted out of the seat. I remember the feeling of the seatbelt stopping me, cutting into my shoulder. My mom's face, scared and pale, as she looked back at me. And Dad letting go of the steering wheel and raising his hands to protect his head. We were falling, I remember thinking. The car had broken through the guardrail and was now plunging into darkness. An empty soda can flew past my face. I remember that one so clearly, seeing that logo whiz by as my mom screamed again. The car's front sank down as we were falling. I could see something in the headlights. Small waves in a body of water. The rain was falling with us, next to us as we tumbled down. Mom's hand reached out to me. That I remember clearly. Her fingernails were just inches from my face as her eyes stared at me with this primal fear in them. Did she know what would happen? Or was she afraid I would die? I asked myself that question 1,000,000 times over the years, even though it's completely pointless. She was just scared, terrified of what was happening. I looked at her at that moment, which was probably a bad idea, thinking back. It was the last time I saw my mom alive, and the face of hers I see in my dreams has that damned, frightened look. The impact shook the whole car. I saw my mom's body shoot forward, her seatbelt yanking her back suddenly, and her neck turning. Dad hit the steering wheel with his head, and I got all the air pressed out of my lungs. Glass broke all around me as the shockwave went through the car. I was dazed and confused. The lights had gone out and it was dark. I felt water rising up my feet, then legs, then hips. Was I crying? That I'm not sure of. I think I remember calling out to Mum, then Dad. There was no response to my mumbling. My body hurt. I felt places the seatbelt had cut into burning with pain. I tried to speak again, louder this time, but my voice was rough and almost disappeared in the sound of the water streaming in. It was cold. That I remember clearly. My fingers fumbled around with the seatbelt's release button. I think I was in complete shock, still trying to call my mum's name, and now getting scared after not hearing a response. She was in the front seat, her head hanging down. The cold water reached my hips as the gurgling sound got louder. It stank of old algae and mud. I finally managed to press the button of my seatbelt and felt it leave the spots on my shoulder and hip that were still burning with pain. The water was rising more quickly, and the fear of drowning pushed the lethargy away. I remember my head hurting as I pulled myself off the seat, then looked around. Mum and Dad were still in the front, still unmoving and not answering. I was thinking about going there, trying to shake them awake, but as soon as I stretched out a hand, I felt this fear stopping me. My whole body was shaking like a leaf. I had no idea what exactly I was going to do to wake them up, and I was afraid one of them might reach out to me and hold me in place while the water filled the car. Deep down, I think I was afraid of realizing that they both were already dead. The tips of my fingers were just a tiny bit away from my mum's shoulder, but I couldn't bring myself to touch her. Instead, I called out to her again, hoping that she would finally respond. She didn't. The water was rising still. It was already touching her chin. I cried out for the first time, and I remember my voice sounding so shrill in the almost darkness. Mum didn't move, and neither did Dad. They were hunched over like puppets without strings. Maybe they were sleeping, I remember thinking. Water splashed up into my mouth and nose, and suddenly I felt wide awake again. I cried out one last time, and my hand touched my mom's shoulder. She didn't react. The car was starting to sink, and suddenly I felt and saw water breaking in completely, flooding the interior. My body shot around while I was still trying to find a way to wake up my parents. I remember grabbing the frame of the broken window next to me, pulling myself out as everything around me went dark, and the car began descending into the muddy water. The following minutes are a complete blur. I remember wondering why I was so deep underwater as I swam up, panic in my mind. Rain hit me once I broke through the surface, but I hardly noticed. My clothing felt far heavier than I had ever known, and I struggled to get to the shore. I remember lying there in the mud and rain, breathing heavily, screaming for Mom and Dad. For how long? I don't know. It's hard to say, since I'm not sure if I lost consciousness or if my mind simply blocked out the memories. What I do know is that suddenly, light fell on me and loud voices rose up through the rain. Someone must have seen the broken guardrail and found me. I remember wishing that Mum and Dad had arrived in another car, but the people who came were complete strangers. Still, they pulled me out of the mud and water and called the police and an ambulance. Deep inside, I hoped that they would save Mum and Dad, even though they must have already been down there for hours. I hardly remember the ambulance ride or the following weeks at all. It was like I found myself in a daze while strangers tried to talk to me about things I had no concept of. Family? Well, Mum and Dad, I answered. I didn't grow up with uncles or aunts or even grandparents. My parents were all I needed. Family, friends? I just shook my head. There was this nice old lady who seemed especially invested in my situation. I remember her talking to me outside one day, with a can of soda in front of me as she tried to have a conversation. All I could think about was that damn can whizzing by my face in those terrifying moments. It was strange. I was still walking around, talking a bit, eating, sometimes even sleeping. But looking back now, it almost feels like I was moving on autopilot. People pulled me along, dragged me into buildings I had never seen before, made me talk to professionals that seemed overworked and exhausted. I only came back to myself as they put me into an orphanage. This would be my new home, someone told me, and that sentence seemed to finally break through the walls I had built up around my mind. I remember crying then and there. Some part of me was still waiting for my parents to turn up again and get me. But the words new home shattered that illusion. To their credit, I remember the person who had said it holding me and letting me cry until the tears stopped on their own, before showing me around the orphanage. It was beautiful, I would say now, but back then it just felt overwhelming. They placed me in one of the smaller rooms with fewer kids, showed me the dining area and the rooms for schooling, and took me out into the garden. It was tranquil, with flowers and a lawn and, to my utter dismay, a small lake further out into the property with a wooden pier on one side. I remember feeling this cold chill as I saw it for the first time. So the person who was showing me around took me by the shoulder and led me away back into the house. That night I had the first nightmare I can still remember even now. I was lying on my mattress, and only one of the other 3 beds was taken. The kid was snoring softly, but I didn't mind. Instead, I waited until all the lights inside the building had been turned off, then got out of bed and walked over to the window we had that overlooked the garden. It was a beautiful, clear night. There wasn't a single cloud up in the sky, and I could see the stars shining so brightly. I felt at peace, at least partially, for the first time since the accident, but that all stopped when I looked down and across the lawn. The lake at the edge of the property was reflecting the moon, and I remember shivering as I stood there, unable to turn my head away. It seemed to speak to me, but only through feelings that flooded my mind. This intense longing filled me as tears began streaming down my face. My body was shaking, trembling as I stood there, unable to turn away my gaze or even close my eyes. It was mesmerizing as it drew me in and held me. I was yearning for home, for Mum and Dad, for the life I had known before. Deep inside I knew that it wasn't possible, that this place now would be my new home. But this part of me didn't want to accept it. It seemed to whisper that it didn't have to be this way, that everything could go back to the way it had been before, that my parents were still waiting for me, looking for me, longing for me to join them just as badly as I did. Someone walked by outside the room, and that noise quickly pulled me out of the trance. The emotion subsided, as did the tears. I turned around and walked back to the bed, ready to fall asleep for the first time in what would be my new home. Saying it was a terrible night would be an understatement. I still remember closing my eyes and listening to my roommate breathing as suddenly the sound of rushing water reached my ears. Surprised, I sat up and looked around, but instead of in my bed, I found myself sitting on the muddy shore next to the small lake the car had crashed into. Water was bubbling up in its center, and the smell of mud and algae hit my nose. I could feel my heart beating so hard in my chest that it hurt my ribs. It was night, just like back then, but instead of rain, the sky above was clear, and the moon was shining as brightly as it had when I looked out of the window. Somehow I knew that I was dreaming, but no matter how hard I pinched myself, I couldn't wake up. It was a nightmare, I told myself, but that didn't calm me down in the least. If I couldn't wake up, did it really matter if it was real or not? Just as I was about to scream for help, I saw it. Something was rising from the lake. Metal shimmered in the moonlight as the top of the car slowly rose up, as if someone was pushing it from below. I could see the dirty water running from its interior and rushing out into the lake. My heart seemed to skip a beat. In the cabin, 2 figures were sitting. Mum and Dad. Their heads weren't sunken down, but upright. Their eyes were open, but strange and different. I could see it so clearly in this dream. Those milky eyes, dead and full of sorrow. My legs trembled badly enough that I thought I would fall over. I felt like I couldn't breathe anymore. Mum's eyes slowly moved from side to side, then fell upon me. Her dead lips were trembling, and as if on cue, Dad's gaze found me as well. I could feel them so clearly, their icy cold stares. They were looking at me with this longing, but not the nice kind. No. It was obsession more than care. I fell back into the mud, my legs too weak to keep me upright. The bodies inside the car started to move about, side to side. I heard the door by the passenger seat opening, saw a cold, dead hand gripping the frame, and finally woke up with a scream. What I remember most about the seconds after the nightmare was that my eyes were wide open, staring up at the ceiling while I couldn't stop crying. My shout woke up half the house, and I was immediately surrounded by strangers' faces, all coming to see what had happened. The next day, the therapist told me that they were accustomed to things like that here, and that I shouldn't feel bad for having woken them up. This orphanage was built with people like me in mind. Back then, the therapist's words helped me. They made me feel better about the situation with the other children, but they didn't do anything for me in regard to the nightmare. Some part of me believed that it hadn't just been a bad dream, but something more. I could feel this stinging pain in my chest anytime my thoughts drifted back to what I had seen. Mom's eyes, that longing, her opening the door of the car. To do what? I asked myself that question over and over again back then, but couldn't find an answer. I think that's a lie. Some part of me had to know what had happened, what the reason was, but I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself. The next night, I stayed away from the window and went to bed. I felt bad about waking up my roommate the day before, so I told myself to just not dream. As if it were that easy. The moment I closed my eyes and started to relax, I could feel it. And I could smell it. That stench of rotten algae and mud. A cold breeze blew past my face, and I knew, even without opening my eyes, that I wasn't in my bed anymore. My body shivered from fear as close by, the sound of water bubbling reached me. I didn't want to look, so I stayed there, lying on the cold mud, almost completely motionless. If I didn't see them, maybe they wouldn't be able to find me either. It was a childish thought, I know. But back then, it seemed like the only thing I could do. The water continued rushing out of something, and I knew that the car must have already appeared. Mum and Dad would be sitting in the front seats. I didn't want to see it. I couldn't stand the idea of looking at them again, even though my heart ached. Some part of me wanted me to just open my eyes, to go to them and be with them. But I knew back then as well as I know now. If I did so, I would never return again. They would have dragged me underwater to stay with them and drown. My arms and legs were shaking hard enough to spray wet droplets of mud across my whole body. The sound of the car door opening reached me and made the shivers stop. I could feel it now. Eyes that fell upon me. Mom was looking at me. I remember thinking back then, and the fear almost made my heart stop. It wasn't like back then before the accident. No. Her gaze almost burned me, and I could feel this cold desire in it. Something moved slowly through the water, coming toward me. I wanted to scream and cry, but part of me warned me against making any noise. If she was coming toward me, I needed to play dead, my child mind told me. Opening my eyes and looking at her would put me in even more danger. I heard the water splashing around softly as she continued moving and my teeth started chattering. She wasn't saying anything, wasn't calling me or whispering my name, but that silence made the whole thing even worse. What did she want? How could I stop her? I had no idea. Some part of me tried to convince me that I was simply dreaming, that I was still lying in bed, safe and sound. Then why could I feel the chill in the air and the wet mud beneath me? Why could I hear Mom moving through the water and toward me? She was here and coming for me. The splashing of the water got louder. I heard her stepping into the shallow part of the small lake. Her eyes were burning holes into me. She opened her mouth with a wet plop, and I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and with the shout, the lake and mud disappeared, and I found myself once again inside the bed in the orphanage, with my roommate softly shaking my shoulder. Apparently, he had woken up when I had started whimpering in my sleep and tried to calm me down. Well, I had another appointment with the therapist the next day, and we talked about it, but somehow I felt like no one was really listening to me. Everyone I had to talk to was telling me about trauma and our responses to it, but I wasn't convinced that it was just all in my mind. The problem was, the more I tried to tell them my side of the story, the more they all seemed to believe their own versions. So I shut up, put my head down and pretended to agree with them. Thankfully, I was transferred to another room, one without anyone else in there and far enough away from the other kids to not bother them at night anymore, even if I woke up screaming. The dreams continued, of course. Every night, I found myself next to the lake, and every night the car slowly rose up and Mom opened the door. I tried running away. I tried screaming for help. Nothing worked. She always left the car and started walking toward me through the shallow waters, and I would wake up before she could reach the shore. I stopped telling the therapist about the dreams after a time. It wasn't like they could help me anyway. There's no wonder drug to keep one from dreaming, so I had to suffer through the nightmares in silence. I'm pretty sure I must have looked pitiful to the other children and adults. Dark bags were under my eyes constantly. I was losing weight and I could hardly concentrate on anything during the day. At recess, I stayed to myself, even if the other children attempted to talk to me. And in school, I was mostly in my own world, doodling in my notebook, trying not to fall asleep. As much as the people tried to be welcoming and understanding of my situation, this orphanage never really felt like home. It felt like a prison. But it got even worse half a year later when one of the other kids invited me to walk with them across the wide lawn and toward the lake. I didn't think about where we were going. I just followed since I felt like I owed them all for making their lives this much harder, having to put up with me. Somehow, I felt this strange kind of unease as I walked beside the other kid. They were talking incessantly, but I stayed quiet as usual. I'm not sure what exactly changed or when or how, but I felt this tension in the air. Twice, I thought about just stopping or running away, but the kid seemed intent on showing me the small lake, and I guess I felt so guilty that I thought that even if I got scared, I somehow deserved it. We reached a small pier, and I suddenly smelled it. That stench of rotting algae and mud. My feet stopped. I remember that very, very clearly. And not even a second later, a hand touched my arm, gripped it, and softly pulled me along. The kid's eyes were staring at me with this malicious twinkle in them. It hadn't asked me to come here to help me. No, This was revenge for whatever they thought I had done to them. I know that I should have screamed, but that strange smell in the air almost paralyzed me. The kid dragged me forward on the pier, and as I looked into the lake, my lips began quivering. Below the pier, the water looked murky, grey and brown. My heart was beating faster and faster as the kid pulled me along. I looked back toward the big house, hoping that one of the adults had noticed me leaving, but no one was coming to save me. The kid chuckled and yanked my arm, and I stumbled forward. I can't remember what that child said to me. I couldn't even understand it back then. My mind was blank. I was shivering and putting up just this tiny bit of resistance. It was like I was back in my dreams, unable to do anything but stare and tremble and cry. The kid continued to pull me along, smiling at my terrified face. We reached the end of the pier. My arm got yanked again, and I stumbled and fell to my knees, only a single step away from the open water. I was crying. That much I remember with absolute clarity. The wooden boards beneath me were blurry in my vision as I stared down, now almost hyperventilating. I heard the kid laughing, then felt a tug on my shoulder to bring me closer to the edge of the pier. My body was shaking so badly. I tried to resist, but even that weak pull made me fall over and sprawl. I remember the feeling of the edge of the last wooden board hitting my chin. Blood was rushing to my head, and suddenly, the laughter of the kid standing next to me disappeared. I'm not sure if it really stopped, or if the terror I felt blocked out everything else. But down there, in the dirty brown and grey water, I saw movement. It wasn't a dream or a hallucination. I know with 100% certainty. I felt it, the eyes staring up at me from the murky depths. Below my body, the boards were shaking as the kid next to me suddenly started to run. Bubbles appeared on the surface of the water right below my face. I could smell the rotten algae and wet mud. Something was moving down there, shaking up the ground. She had found me, some part of me wound. Mom. As soon as I had that thought, the water suddenly stopped bubbling, and beneath the surface, this dead, pale face appeared. I screamed at the top of my lungs and heard footsteps racing toward me. Mom, below the surface of the water, smiled, but her grin held no warmth. My vision got blurry as I looked at her face, and I don't know if I simply lost consciousness, or if my mind is still blocking out what happened after. But the next thing I remember is sitting at a therapist's table, trembling like a leaf. People were talking to me. No, at me. The therapist and one of the workers of the orphanage. I was nodding along, unable to listen to them. Nothing they said held any meaning to me. All I could think about was my mother's face below the surface. How could she have found me? Was it because I had thought about her? I was so scared, so confused. I didn't even ask if anything happened to the other child. All I remember is that the therapist handed me 2 pills in one of those small plastic cups of water. I couldn't even open my eyes as I washed down the medication for fear of seeing something inside the cup. The rest of the day is completely hazy. I don't remember anything until suddenly I found myself lying in the bed in my room, staring at the window. A voice reached me through the fog surrounding my mind. Someone was calling my name, and my body stood up on its own. I remember moving as if sleepwalking through my room, to the door and out into the hallway. My steps were almost silent as I slowly moved through the dark house, while the moon outside was shining down between the clouds that were covering the sky. It felt unreal, like a dream, but not a bad one. Maybe it was the pills, maybe I was just finally too exhausted to care. I couldn't speak or do anything. It felt like I was only a passenger in my own body, as my legs were carrying me through the building. But the tranquility didn't last long. I descended the stairs in the back of the house, far away from the 1 or 2 people doing the night shift. And as soon as I realized that, this unease set in. My body was still walking almost silently through the house, but now I finally understood where it was going. I slipped out of the door in the back, kept to the shadows as I crossed the lawn, and then ducked down before sneaking by the only brightly lit window. My teeth were chattering in the cold night air. The farther I came, the more this uneasiness turned into fear. It took me until I walked into the deep shadows on the other side of the lawn before I was sure where my feet were taking me. The small lake with the pier. A breeze hit me in the face, coming from that direction, and instantly the stench pulled me out of my trance. I still couldn't move or scream, but the fog around my mind was blown away, and I realized in what kind of danger I truly was. Up ahead, I could see the dark lake with the pier, and my body was moving toward it now with renewed vigor. Another breeze blew past me and carried with it not just a stench, but now also that voice. It called my name in this sorrowful tone. I felt like my blood was running cold as I continued walking. The sound of bubbling mortar reached my ears. It's only a dream, I told myself, even though I knew already that it wasn't. This was real. My body was moving on its own toward my inevitable end. I reached the pier, stepped onto the wood, and looked out over the lake. The clouds above moved to the side, and in the soft light of the moon, I saw it for the first time. A car was there, half submerged in the lake's water, and inside, I could see 2 figures covered by deep and dark shadows. My body continued on, and I had to listen to my own footsteps on the wooden boards. The people inside the car were turning their heads towards me. I could feel 2 pairs of eyes staring out at me. My whole body was shivering as I watched the door in the back open and dirty, stinking water flowing out and splashing onto the pier. This was my destination. It was where I belonged. I could feel my mother's gaze turn cold as my feet dragged me forward. Back then, I shouldn't have left. This was just her, taking me home. Tears were starting to swim in my eyes as I walked over the pier. The car was so close already. Its door was standing open, waiting for me. I could be together with my parents again, this voice promised. Even now, I still remember reaching out, touching the cold and slick metal above the door. And finally, that trance broke. I pulled back, and air flooded my lungs together with that now well-known stench. My feet slipped on the wet wooden boards. I screamed, but suddenly stopped as something touched my ankle. Looking up, my body froze. Mum was staring at me, not from the front, but already crawling over her seat and into the back, where the door was open. Her hand, slender as before, was wrapped around my ankle. I couldn't breathe anymore. In the light of the moon, I could see how dead her skin looked. It was swollen from lying in cold water, bloated, and dark spots could be seen all over. Her fingernails were missing, but the hand held on to me with surprising strength. She pulled, and my whole body moved toward the open door. I was shaking my head in disbelief, but her eyes were showing no mercy. She wanted me, needed me to come with them, to join them. My own fingers dug into the space between the boards. She pulled me in again, and I felt the jerk throughout my whole body, from my ankle up to my shoulders. I was crying and screaming again. A second hand grabbed my other leg, and I knew if I entered the car, I would never again get out. Mum pulled me in once more. My fingers slipped out of the gap between the boards, and my nails scratched over the wood. My screams cut through the calm night, and lights were going on inside the house. I was howling as my feet touched the cold metal. The stench was filling my nostrils. Looking back, I could see my mum's face there. Her eyes had nothing human to them anymore. She looked monstrous. Her mouth opened, and dirty brown water flowed out and splashed onto the car's floor. I kicked at her as she pulled me in deeper. My knees touched the frame, and in my panic, My eyes met hers. Begging for my life, I howled at her to let me go, and for a second I felt the grasp around my ankles lessening. I pushed myself off and over, slipped from her hands and fell between the car and the wooden pier into the dirty water of the lake. Darkness surrounded me, but I didn't care. I swam, not upward, but down, away from the vehicle and her. In my mind, I could feel and see her hands everywhere, ready to reach out to me and pull me back. My shoulder touched the muddy ground. I whirled around and thought I could hear someone whispering my name as I struggled to get away. I don't know how much time passed, only that my lungs were burning while the rest of my body felt terribly cold as I suddenly broke through the surface at the water's edge, rolled over and landed on the hard ground. The car was gone as I looked up, and 6 flashlights were coming from the house. My life changed again that night. I couldn't stay there any longer, so I was transferred to another institution. A closed one. It took me years to get over my trauma, but I got out when I turned 18. As you can imagine, I don't like water very much. I use a shower, but only ever for a short time. If it's raining, I don't go out, and I haven't been swimming or been by a lake again since that dreadful night. Once or twice, when I passed by a puddle, I could feel her gaze again. She's looking out at me, even now, from any body of water I come across. And every year, at the anniversary of my parents' death, I can smell the stench of rotten algae and mud in the air.